Start the new year right and make your winning move today. Go bet at MyBookie. Use promo code Gators to claim your deposit match, redeemable up to $1,000. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie. And Gators Breakdown is proud to partner with America's #1 meal kit, HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com/GatorsFree and use code GatorsFree for free breakfast for life with an active subscription.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for the first show of the 2024 year is co-host Will Miles. You can find him at a site, Read and Reaction, on YouTube at Read and Reaction as well. First show of the year, Will. It's, I guess there kind of was a dull moment finally. Not necessarily for Florida, because there really never is, but you and I, we took some time off last week, enjoyed time with family and the holidays, and here we are, back at it in the saddle for first show right here on January 2nd, heading into this 2020, the year of 2024, and man, just a lot to get into, but I hope your holidays and all the time with the family was really good.
Yeah, man, staycation up here in Philly. We're getting ready for snow next week, so everybody's excited. Saturday night, we're supposed to get like 8 inches of snow, so that'll be fun. And yeah, I mean, look, I think 2023, obviously a rough year for Florida and Florida fans. The hope is that 2024 is going to be better. We've got plenty of stuff to talk about, obviously, and a lot of roster building to be done by Billy Napier and company. And we're going to be here talking about it over the next 4 or 5 months as they build out what's going to be coming in the transfer portal, what's going to be coming National Signing Day, and then obviously the players who are to be coming after the spring transfer portal session. There's a lot of roster building and manipulation that needs to be done, and obviously we'll be here for all of it.
Absolutely. So, man, plenty to get into because as I said, you and I took some time off last week, so we got to kind of review a little bit of guys who have entered the transfer portal from Florida. And also, man, we got some breaking news to talk about right before we come live here of who's visiting this week, who's entering the transfer portal from other schools that Florida may be interested in. So, Florida will be hot and heavy hosting transfer portal visitors this week. And some New Year's resolutions. It is definitely, I think needed to talk about out there. I want some of you guys leave your New Year's resolutions, not for yourself, but for the Florida Gators out there. So plenty to get into right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown, and we will do it like we always do right here in 2024. So hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, right here on the YouTube version or your favorite podcast platform. All those likes, those subscriptions go a long way. Let's make 2024 bigger than 2023. We got of course a lot to get into as we move forward. But you can do it at Gators Breakdown Plus as well. Join in on the conversation. It's hot and heavy right now in the Discord. All the movement going on out there, all the breaking news. So if you want to be a member of Gators Breakdown Plus, talk to other Gator fans, you can do so there in the Discord chat. Extra episodes, those chat episodes, all right there. Link is in the description to join Gators Breakdown Plus. So, all right, well, let's get to it. 18 departures so far for the Gators off the team, heading in the transfer portal. The most recent departures, of course, Mazzccua, Scooby Williams, Jaden Hill. We'll start on the offensive side, Will. We'll start with Mazzccua as the other two guys are on defense, and all the transfer portal talk right now is defense. So that'd be a nice segue. So much of the offensive talk will come right now of offensive guard. Mazzccua hit the transfer portal. Started in 11 of 12 games this past year. I think the only game he didn't start was when he was suspended for getting into that fight against Tennessee. So 743 snaps this past year. And look, we got to go back. I mean, remember, he wanted to hit the transfer portal in the springtime after he came to Florida. Florida talked him out of it. He got injured, of course, in spring ball as well. Chose not to lead the team. And look, it was thought of to be a one-year guy anyway, but the thought was maybe to go to the NFL as the next step. So always looked at as a one-year guy, but mostly because the draft was the next step. So, putting it all together with wanting to transfer again, but changing his mind and the thought of a one-year player, this isn't a surprise. it'd be nice to have some continuity up front along the offensive line with Mazzccua returning, but at the same time, I'm not sure he ever really played up to what he thought he could be. Given that he was one of the highest rated offensive linemen coming from Baylor in the transfer portal a year ago, so was far from a liability. I mean, I think he was, for this offensive line, of a reliable piece of the offensive line. So you start looking at it. Najee Harris expected to become, a starting guard, I think, in this offense next year. Played in all 12 games, had one start as a true freshman as well. Maybe just moved to Damian George to guard as well. And look, maybe competition there with Richie Leonard and maybe even Roderick Kearney as well. So we'll see what happens with him if he stays solely at center or not. But there are some options, some younger options as well for the Gators at guard. I'm of the mind, Will. This is this 2 offensive line approach. If it continues into year 3, that should pay off in the name of development in year 3. Some of these young guys hopefully take that next step with Mazzccua on his way out.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think Mazzccua was the best offensive lineman, but he was far from the problem when it came to the offensive line. Jake Slaughter, actually, if you look at Pro Football Focus, I've really been looking at their numbers recently. I'll cite a lot of those tonight. Jake Slaughter was the best offensive lineman for Florida last year, but then Mazzccua was second. He was above average for a guard. And so was he Osiris Torrance? No, absolutely he wasn't. And that was what he was sort of billed coming in. It's like, hey, this is the guy that Napier and company have targeted. They got Osiris Torrance from Louisiana, brought him in. He's a unanimous All-American. Hey, we'll just be able to plug and play somebody in that spot and develop them in the same way. And it turns out Osiris Torrance has been pretty good for Buffalo this year in the NFL. So it's not, plug and play on offensive line just really isn't the way that it works. A lot of times these are guys you have to develop from early stages. And given where Florida is in their roster development, it kind of makes sense that you would say, hey, we need a guy like Najee Harris to step in. We need we need Roderick Kearney to step in. Like, those are guys they recruited, blue chip guys who they've recruited in the trenches. Those are guys who are going to have to be a big part of what Florida is building towards 2 or 3 years from now when DJ Lagway is starting to come into his own. If you've got this sort of revolving door at offensive line, then I think you're going to start to have issues with that. And we saw that this year, really, with Torrance leaving and having to plug somebody else in. Not a surprise that Mazzccua decides to transfer. You mentioned all the drama that was happening during the, right before the season, but he also went out with flowers for his family and stuff on senior day against Florida State. We'll talk about that for another one of these guys we're going to talk about too. So nobody hiding the ball on this one. You go out for senior day when you got 3 years of eligibility left. It means you're either going to the pros or you're entering the transfer portal. And so took a little while to make that announcement. But, again, I think the problem that Florida is running into is they didn't have a lot of guys who were above average. And so on either side of the ball. And so when you lose a guy who was above average, not only do you have to replace him, but then you've got to replace the other people around him with above average play. And that's where it starts to get dicey because, if you were able to keep Mazzccua on the roster, then you could bring in someone else at a different spot and get above average play. Instead, you're going to have to rely on development. So Austin Barber and Richie Leonard and Damian George all ranked below Mazzccua. Those guys, if they're all still on the roster, are going to have to step forward in order to just hit average. And then you also have to find somebody who's average to replace Mazzccua just to get average play. And obviously that's not really the goal. The goal is to have, above average top 10 type play. And nobody on Florida's offensive line was given that sort of play last year.
Yeah, Will, so I think if we look at it, if we go left to right, just putting it together right now with who's on the roster, transfer portal can still come into play here. Left tackle, maybe Crenshaw Dixon, the new transfer Florida just brought in. Maybe he's played right and left tackle. Maybe he slots into left tackle this past year. I think you go left guard. It's probably a Harris-Leonard combination of some competition coming up. Slaughter at center. Right guard, do you move Damian George there? Does he compete with somebody like Kearney, or is that a Harris, Leonard? Harris played there a little bit last year too, so I think you could slot him in there. And then right tackle, do you move Austin Barber back there now with Crenshaw Dixon, and maybe he elevates that play that we saw 2 years ago or 2 seasons ago under Billy Napier. Now, one big advantage he had playing right tackle is he had Osiris Torrance at right guard next to him, so that makes the right tackles look better. But I think just looking at it right now, with what's on the roster, that's probably how it slots without Micah Mazzccua in the starting lineup.
Yeah, I think. Did you mention Cam Waits? Because I think he's
I
sort
did
of the
not. I
one.
did not. Yeah.
So I think he's the one who's sort of, fully more than a year off of the surgery for the Achilles. He's a guy that really, if Florida can have him be a difference maker, then all of a sudden it shores everything up. You mentioned Crenshaw Dixon played pretty well in his time at other locations, but is going to have to transfer that to Florida. Barber was a little bit below average this year. And then you start, we immediately went to guys like Kearney and guys like Harris to sort of fit in there. But again, those guys have to earn that spot. If Cam Waits can secure a tackle spot, well, that does two things. One is it means that there's real competition at the tackle spots. But the other thing is that does free up Damian George to move on the inside. So look, there's a lot of moving parts here. You always have that with the offensive line, especially given all the turnover that Florida's had at that particular space. I would love to see the young guys get some run, but obviously they got to beat out the guys who have already been there, the incumbents, and they got to make sure that they're pushing those guys in order to get to where Florida needs to get to. And you very rarely go through an entire season with only 5 offensive linemen playing all year long. So you need 6 or 7 guys you trust anyway. And that's really when you're going to get to the young guys, even if they aren't starters. You're going to have to rely on those guys. Somebody's going to twist an ankle. Somebody's going to get bent up underneath and hurt a knee. Someone's going to have a non-contact injury. Hopefully not, but someone will. And so, someone's going to tear a bicep or something when they're trying to pick up a blitz. You get that sort of injury, and someone's going to have to be able to step up. So to me, the concern isn't just who are going to be the front 5. It's who's going to be 6, 7, 8, 9. Do you trust those guys? And can those guys provide similar level play to the guys that they have to replace when there's an injury on the offensive line? Because the last couple of years, when there's been an injury, there's been a significant drop off. Mm-hmm. And last year, let's be honest, I mean, Damian George was not very good there at right tackle. And so that was a liability for Florida. We saw it when Florida had to throw against Florida State. And, that means you only had 5 guys, right? You didn't have someone to come in and replace him when he wasn't playing necessarily up to snuff.
Yep, so there we go. Catching us up on an offensive lineman on the way out, but we would now move to defense, and this is where a lot of the headlines are, of course, for most of the talk around Gator Nation right now, whether it be leaving and or coming to Florida through the transfer portal. So now on the defense, and look, I get Will. Not mourning players on that side of the ball that are leaving after what we have seen in that terrible play. I'll try to look at it from both sides, both angles. It's what we do a lot of here. We present a good and a bad. The guys are losing. Overall, played a ton of snaps last year, and you'd like eventually for Florida to take a step, to rely on guys who have taken snaps and be contributors the next season. Lost one already with Princely to Ole Miss and possibly McClellan to Missouri. Those are 2 players that just went to SEC teams that played New Year's 6 games and won double-digit games, so they see plenty of value in those players that just left Florida. But Scooby Williams, Jaden Hill are the 2 players contributed a ton of snaps last season. At some point, you'd love to be able to build on experience and not fall back on youth. Now, some of that is part of college football today and just a makeup of college football in the transfer portal. And I think, for Florida, now you have to look at it. Are there enough difference makers in young players and or the transfer portal coming up to replace? And we will start with Scooby Williams. Finished 3rd on the team in tackles with 53, along with 4 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, and a sack. God-awful Pro Football Focus grades there. I'll let you – I know you was doing the PFF, Will, so I'll let you go into that a little bit more if you want to. But benched kind of the final 2 games of the year to Roger Mitchell. Steps in for him toward the end of the year. Would have had to win his job back, of course, going into the 2024 season. I think if we look at it, Will, this past year, I thought he was okay, toward the beginning of the year when he also got to line up beside Shamar James, him with Scooby playing the will linebacker. But once he had to take over for an injured Shamar James at the Mike spot, you could see the dramatic fall off. He's a true tweener for linebacker and edge rusher. Scooby is, possibly now if you look at it, possibly in a battle with Derek Wingo, who I still see more as a backup to Shamar, but still. Probably in a battle with a Derek Wingo, a Manny Nunnery, Jaden Robinson, the awesome true freshman that we're seeing highlights of all week in the All-Star games with Graham and Childs, and maybe a transfer as we look at it. But, this is still somebody who garnered a ton of snaps last season that won't be on the roster next year. Could he have gotten better after his first season of meaningful snaps in a new defense under Austin Armstrong, or had he reached his ceiling? The timing of this, and asking around tells me this is more of a Scooby decision than him being pushed out. Now, I don't think he was guaranteed a spot next season, but still could compete for a job here at Florida. Still no linebacker coach. I've told that can be a factor here as well. So what this means, the name I mentioned earlier, Wingo, Nunnery, Robinson, the freshman, Graham and Childs, those are the pieces that are now on the roster. And maybe Florida hits the portal for Scooby's replacement. Not long before we came live here on Gators Breakdown, and everybody and their family let me know, because they know just how close I was to this one a little bit in the recruiting process. Grayson Pup Howard from here in Jacksonville hits the transfer portal, linebacker at South Carolina. Committed to them a year ago, spent a year in Columbia. He's in the portal right now, so of course he is going to shoot up the board for Florida in replacing somebody like a Scooby Williams. So besides Nunnery, everybody else will be a young piece at this linebacker group in a critical year 3 for Billy Napier. Look, no doubt about it, Will. These young linebackers will eventually be better than Scooby Williams was at linebacker. There's no doubt about that. But would that be the case in a critical year 3 for Billy Napier?
Well, so I think the question is always compared to what? Like whenever somebody says, "Oh, you need to fire somebody," it's like, well, compared to like who can you get to replace them? And it's the same thing with players. Like when a player decides to leave, what do you have to do to replace them? That's why a guy like Princely Umanmielen leaving is a big deal. It's not necessarily that Umanmielen was the best defensive end or best jack linebacker who was out there. It's that he was slightly above average when you take sort of his overall ratings. Again, I'll use PFF, but I think most people are like, he was a solid jack linebacker. Or jack edge rusher. He wasn't necessarily the best guy out there, but he was solid. And now compared to what? Who are you going to put at that position? Now, if LJ McCray comes in, has 14 sacks next year and is all over the field, no one's going to weep that Princely Umanmielen left. Now, if LJ McCray comes in, has 3 sacks and can't hold up against the run, well, now people will be like, well, he needed a year to study under Princely Umanmielen, right? So I think that's always the question, is compared to what? Now, Scooby Williams, there's no doubt he was put in some rough situations over the last couple of years. Really, any linebacker who's played for Florida has been put into some rough situations because they just haven't had a whole lot of talent at that position. And his profile from a recruiting perspective, I think it was like the 85th overall player or something like that back when he came in, was somebody who could potentially be a 3-down linebacker. But you alluded to his Pro Football Focus numbers. He was a 42.1 last year overall, which is in the bottom 10 of all linebackers in FBS, or in the Power 5, sorry, not FBS. But the big thing was he was even worse in coverage. So, his run defense was okay. His pass rush was decent. And then in coverage, he just got exposed over and over and over again. We saw that especially in the LSU game where, it was obvious, but you could see that where they were facing an explosive offense, it could really isolate him. And you felt kind of bad for him. But, hey, that's the reality, right? When you're a middle linebacker, you got to be able to do some of those things. I think the question in terms of how much Florida will miss him will be, where does he end up, right? If Scooby Williams ends up transferring to Mississippi State, or transfers to LSU, or transfers to some other SEC school and goes out and plays meaningful minutes, then that's something where it's like, okay, did Florida miss in the evaluation, or would that year have really progressed what he was doing when he comes back in next year? If he goes to a place even like Indiana, or non-Power 5, ends up at like Tulane or Bowling Green or something like that, okay, well, then this was probably something where it was best that both parties move on. So that to me is the thing. But look, the eye test matches the stats, matches the individual player ratings. He just struggled last year, and that's the reality. So if you're talking about a bottom 10 linebacker in Power 5, is a guy like Pup Howard, if they're able to get him to come in now that he's in the portal and upgrade, well, in limited snaps, so about half the snaps that Scooby had last year, he had a much better Pro Football Focus rating, 58.8, still struggled in coverage, though. And I think that's the thing, is that when you're looking for guys to step in and contribute immediately, you'd really like a guy who's already shown that he can play at an elite level, whether it's at an SEC school, whether it's another Power 5 school, or whether it's a group of 5 school, but somebody who's played at an elite level at one of those places. Pup Howard hasn't necessarily showed that yet, but I think just based on the limited sample size, you can say that he's an upgrade on a guy like Scooby Williams, just based on the overall body of work, and really also what you're asking them to do in the Austin Armstrong scheme. Clearly that scheme didn't necessarily fit what Scooby Williams was best at, and he got exploited, especially, like you said, once he got moved to middle linebacker.
And for somebody like Grayson, or somebody like the true freshman, while we're speaking young players here, guys who have at least played linebacker in high school. There's an instinct. There is an experience that comes with play in that position. And for years under Todd Grantham, and it's kind of bled over here for Billy Napier a little bit, you're playing tweeners, maybe guys who didn't play the position in high school, or you were forced to play that position, and just it never come around. Look, it took Amari Burney forever to become not a liability at the position, and I thought he took massive steps in his final year last year, and he was a productive linebacker for Florida last year, and it took that time. So now we've been excited for this recruiting class that just come in. We all wanted Pup Howard to really to begin with. Hopefully you target him. He comes into the class, and it gives you 3 young, true, traditional linebackers. You got Nunnery in there, who I've said has got some experience. Who, he won't be green out there if he has to play early on next year until these guys get their feet under him a little bit. Derek Wingo did some nice things toward the end of the year last year as well. So, but look, even he's a guy who didn't necessarily play full-time linebacker at high school, as we keep with that topic bringing it up. So I think that's what excites me the most about a lot of the young guys, and I hope it translates a little faster because they have that instinct, they have that playing linebacker behind them.
Well, I mean, look, when Harold Perkins went to LSU 2 years ago, it didn't take him that long to make an impact, right? The reality is that there are guys who just go out there and flash. Shamar James is a great example of somebody who went out there and immediately was somebody you looked at and said, all right, a linebacker. Like, it's been a long time since we've had one of these guys. Nunnery's interesting because he actually came in as a safety, right? He was a guy who was a defensive back, got moved to linebacker. You mentioned Wingo, same thing. Jaden Robinson's a guy you probably don't want to forget about, a guy who's been in the system now for a year, came in last year's recruiting class, but a blue chip guy who's going to get an opportunity. And so that's the thing. I mean, you talked about Scooby being guaranteed a job. You aren't guaranteed anything when you struggle the way this defense struggled. And I think one of the messages that the coaching staff probably needs to send to everybody is nothing's guaranteed. You were the starting defensive end, you were the starting defensive tackle, you were the starting jack, like whatever. There's no guarantee. So while we're not weeping that these guys are leaving, it does call into question some of the things, which is that, the whole sort of call to patience this year was, well, we're playing all these young guys. So that's going to be the question. A guy like McClellan leaving is the thing that really hurts, because you sit there and you look at it and go, that was one of those young guys you were getting snaps when you were talking about playing all these young guys. And so you can't have those guys leave. Scooby doesn't fit within that profile. And so I think him, Human Meelan, and Hill, those guys fit within the experienced guys who probably have kind of reached what their ceiling's going to be. Like, there might be a jump, but is the jump going to be massive? And is it going to be anything other than sort of being replacement level? I think that's sort of the question that you try to answer when you're thinking about who's leaving and who's coming in.
All right, and we will go to him now next. Jaden Hill, his best season came this past year, and it was his first season playing full-time at the nickel spot, 39 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 pass breakups. I thought he was probably the most aggressive defensive back Florida had this past year. But look, he played that new star role, played outside cornerback before that. Coaching changes happening there on the backside now for Florida, so maybe that plays a factor here as well. Of course, he dealt with injuries throughout his career, so figured he'd probably try his luck at the draft. That's what I thought. I thought he may try to. I thought the next step would be the draft, given all the injury history he's had, and maybe it's just time. But regardless, we won't be at Florida. Going to go to another program and try and improve his draft stock possibly. I know Alabama is a school that's been thrown out there, his home state as well. We'll see what comes of that. But I thought he was a bright spot in an otherwise disappointing defense. He could cover, not afraid to tackle. I'd love for him to kind of, return. I thought, that was a possibility at one point. And maybe compete with somebody like a Sharif Denson, who played a lot toward the end of the year, did appear in all 12 games. I love his physicality. He was a guy here in Jacksonville that I followed, so it's easier for me to follow the Jacksonville guys. And I just talked about Hill being fast, physical, aggressive, and that's exactly what Sharif Denson is. Can really, really play with that physical mindset I think is needed at that nickel star spot that we haven't seen in quite some time. So also, Triquez Bridges is an option. I think, just to transfer from Oregon is a versatile piece. He said Florida would play him at safety. I think nickel star can kind of be in that role as well. Maybe they figure out there, and we'll get into it in just a second because Florida's hitting the transfer portal hard for the defensive back. But Jaden Hill, all in all, I would have loved to have him on next year's team, Will, but also at the same time excited for Sharif Denson.
Yeah, so I thought Hill right around average, a little bit below average. He was good against the run. He was good in run support for being at that star position. He was good in pass rush, though he missed a few tackles. The Arkansas ones are the ones that really jump out to me, where if he'd been able to get the Arkansas running back Rocket Sanders to the ground there in overtime, maybe that entire overtime period is different. Coverage is where he struggled. So Pro Football Focus has him at 60.3 overall in coverage. And here's the reality: is in modern college football, your corners, you'd love for them to tackle. You'd love for them to be good coming on the blitz. But where they make their money and where they make the team better is in coverage. And that was the place where Jaden Hill struggled more than anywhere else, which is, again, that's not news and also is not necessarily isolated to Jaden Hill when you start talking about the corners that Florida had. But so I look at it and I go, solid player, but probably on a good defense, a backup corner. Right? Like if you had a truly elite defense, if you had one of those must-champ defenses or the ones McElwain inherited in 2015 and 2016, where's Jaden Hill sit on the depth chart? And I think he's a backup, maybe even a third stringer on those teams. And you start looking at Sharif Denson and Jakeem Jackson and some of the other guys that they brought in, Bryce Thornton there at safety, obviously a little bit different position, but you start looking at those guys and say, are those the guys we want to get time, not just because we invested last year's freshman season in it, but that there's a more of an upside when it comes to the coverage, which is what you really need. You start looking at the Alabamas of the world and the Georgias of the world, and one of the places last year, at least, that they really excelled was at both safety and corner. And you saw it the other night in the playoff games where there were a bunch of times. There's that flea flicker play that Michigan ran that was disrupted. That was disrupted by a safety who was blitzing. And then there was another play where they sort of faked the run out of the Wildcat, and a safety had to pick up almost their star position had to pick up the tight end leaking out, and he was able to do that. Those sorts of things are things that just Florida has not done over the last couple of years. And look, again, I think Hill, good player, but where would he sit on the depth chart of a championship team, I think are the questions you have to start asking when you're talking about guys who are going to be redshirt seniors. And so, again, this was another one of the guys who came out with flowers on senior day, so not a surprise that he's leaving the program. Like you said, it was always a question of NFL or a different program. Wish him well. I mean, his story and, sort of what he's meant to the Florida program over the last 3 or 4 years is significant. He's a guy I've just been sort of rooting for as a guy who's watched the program, seen the injuries, seen how he's gone about his business, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I would love to see him go someplace else, excel, and get a shot in the league, and hopefully he's able to do that.
Yeah, like I said, the positions, we're talking about here, linebacker and defensive back. I mean, there are coaching changes there as well. So I think, you can't forget that, have to factor that in. And certainly goes to our next topic here of all these transfer portal targets coming in to visit Gainesville this week. And there are lots of them really, really focused on the defensive side of the ball. But before we get there, start the new year right with MyBookie. MyBookie has the biggest online selection of odds and contests to fill all your sports betting needs anytime, anywhere. So you can turn that sports knowledge into cash in your wallet. The NFL playoffs, the college football playoff final between Michigan and Washington, all next week. Bet on all that or play for a big share of cash prizes in the weekly blackjack tournaments. If you've been waiting for the right time to get in on the action, well, that time is now. Make your winning move today. Sign up at MyBookie, use promo code Gators, and claim your deposit match, redeemable up to $1,000. One more time, that's promo code Gators to claim your bonus. Experience the thrill of sports betting right from the comfort of your home. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere at MyBookie. Whether your New Year's resolution is to save money, eat better, or stress less, you can have all three by using America's #1 meal kit, HelloFresh. Make saving time your breeziest resolution with quick, convenient recipes delivered right to your door. Just choose your meals, select your delivery date. HelloFresh handles the meal planning and shopping, so all you have to do is open your weekly box of pre-portioned ingredients and the step-by-step recipes to get cooking. Breakfast is now worth waking up for. I'm a big fan of the quick, easy egg bites to get my day going. Pop them in the microwave, and man, you got a tasty hot breakfast right there. You can have this too. Go to HelloFresh.com/GatorsFree. Use code GatorsFree for free breakfast for life. One breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/GatorsFree with code GatorsFree. Well, I put it up yesterday and have been having to update it at gatorsbreakdown.com. But all some, I won't say all, because some, I don't think some are public. I think maybe even still trying to figure it out. And there was some breaking news even before we came live right here. But all these visitors coming to Gainesville this week through the transfer portal. And I guess we kind of got to start with some of the bad news first. Jaden Voisin, safety at South Alabama. You and I were talking, Will, one of our top targets here in the transfer portal. We thought we'd be on campus this week. Right before we come live here on Gators Breakdown, says he will not visit Gainesville and will visit Mississippi State. Mississippi State visit was in the plans anyway, but he's the third-ranked safety in the portal. Coming out, you probably saw me on my monitor looking off to the side earlier in the episode. Maybe sounds like a credits grade issue here there. So coming from South Alabama, we know how that sometimes happens with Florida and transfers. But one play I was really looking forward to, Will, we won't spend too much time on it since it doesn't seem like it will happen. But one reason we added him to the list, one more time, the third-ranked safety in the portal was Jaden Voisin. In 2023, had 71 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 4 interceptions, 7 pass breakups, a forced fumble. He had 79 tackles in 2022. 156 tackles to his name, 6 interceptions, 3 forced fumble in his career. He had 1 season of eligibility remaining. Was a player, as I said, you and I were kind of excited to get on campus this week, but will not happen.
Yeah, I mean, so Pro Football Focus had him 84.6 this year overall, so that is 15.5 points above their average for cornerbacks. He was 89.8 in coverage in 753 snaps. So Pro Football Focus, for you guys who don't know, basically they sit there and they grade every play, and they say it's on a scale from -2 to +2, and then they normalize that to 100. So most of the time the average is somewhere around 65 to 70. So somebody at 85 is a significant player, even in a group of 5 school there at South Alabama, but 89.8 in coverage. We talked about Jadon Hill, some of his deficiencies in the coverage side. Voisin was a guy I was excited about because the strength was going to be the coverage at the safety position. And that's a place where Florida just has struggled, right? I mean, how many times has there been a guy in good position with a ball going downfield and it ends up right in the hands of the receiver when it feels like Florida could have put a better fight downfield to knock the ball down? How many times has there just been a complete coverage bust where there's a guy wide open? How many times have we missed a tackle when a guy comes across on a little crossing route that turns a 5-yard route into an 80-yard run or an 80-yard pass? And those sorts of things have happened over and over and over again over the last few years. I think Voisin probably had that sort of profile. Again, though, I think we're going to go over this list, and there's a lot of good players on here as well. Not necessarily just Voisin, but certainly he was one of the guys you looked at and said, hey, I'm glad they have him on the list because that's somebody who can make Florida better.
All right, so yeah, as you will hear, that was of course, somebody who would come in and play safety. A lot of these names are in the defensive backfield. As you can see, Will Harris, a new DB coach, making moves here. I think we saw it all over social media the last couple of weeks since he's been hired, of all these transfer portal visitors coming in. So let's go DJ Douglas. He's another safety out of Tulane. Spent 2 years at Alabama as a walk-on, Will. Transferred to Tulane for the 2021 season. Played in 36 games, contributing 78 tackles, 4 interceptions, 7 passes defended. This past year, 54 of his 78 tackles came. He had 3 interceptions this past year. 1 season of eligibility remaining. Should be visiting tomorrow on this Wednesday. Could be today by the time you listen to this. So start going down the list even more. John Humphrey, cornerback. He committed to USC. So he's committed already out of the portal, Will, after he was coming from UCLA. So in 2023, this past season, John Humphrey recorded 31 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, and had 2 interceptions. Played 4 seasons at UCLA, so a lot of experience here. Played in a total of 54 games to John Humphrey, recording 76 total tackles, 54 solo, 5 passes defended, 2 interceptions. He's supposed to visit on January 3rd as well. Then who I would say right now, Will, and I'll let you hop in after this one, he may be the crown jewel actually at a cornerback spot. Cam Alexander from UTSA, Texas San Antonio, finished the 2023 season with 34 tackles, 17 passes defended, and 2 interceptions. All AAC first team while leading the conference for passes defended. and 10th in the country in passes defended was Cam Alexander. He was MVP of the Frisco Bowl, transferred to UTSA from Sam Houston, where he appeared in 32 career games, 52 total tackles, 41 solo stops, 6 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions, 16 pass breakups. For his career, 45 games played, 14 starts, 86 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 36 passes defended, 5 interceptions for Cam Alexander. Was certainly blowing up social media. Offers from everywhere out there for Cam Alexander at the cornerback spot. Just options at safety, options at cornerback. But Cam Alexander really coming on here toward the tail end of his career, looking to elevate, and maybe Florida is his next destination.
Yeah, so Alexander definitely the best out of the 3 guys you just listed there: DJ Douglas, John Humphrey, and Cam Alexander, at least in terms of their profiles. Pro Football Focus has Alexander at 81.4, so again, up above 80. 79 for John Humphrey, 72.3 for DJ Douglas. But what I would say is if you look at the coverage ratings for those guys, it's 77.6 for Douglas, 77.8 for Humphrey, and 83.1 for Alexander. So in terms of the skill that if you were looking at a corner, you'd say, this is what I want. All 3 of those guys actually have very solid coverage statistics, and all of them in a large number of snaps. So 652 for Douglas, 614 for Humphrey, and 597 for Alexander. So these are guys who've done it, and they've done it over a significant number of snaps. So we would expect performance levels, barring injury, to stay at that general level, which is really, look, Florida needs more than one defensive back when it comes to adding to the overall team. You think about, we just talked about Jedon Hill leaving, but you've also got Miguel Mitchell and Kamari Wilson from the first recruiting class who've both decided to enter the transfer portal. And so just replacing numbers wise, Florida needs to do something there as well. But to be able to replace numbers wise with guys who have performed, and to supplement the guys like Castell, the guys like Thornton, the guys like Jakeem Jackson, the guys like Dijon Johnson, those sorts of guys, I think it's I think it's important to have that sort of. I think it's important to have those sorts of guys on the roster.
Absolutely. So I do think, going to your point, you can certainly see the targets here of hitting the defensive backfield. You said they're bringing in a ton of them. I think to make sure that they get this defensive backfield shored up, and we'll go to 2 more right here. One that made waves early on, Marcus Ratcliffe. He's a defensive back. Committed to UCLA in early December after entering the transfer portal from San Diego State. Started as a true freshman, finished with 50 tackles and an interception. He played safety, nickel, linebacker for San Diego State, so you're getting a versatile piece here in the secondary. Hey, we just talked about Jaden Hill leaving, needing somebody to fill in at the nickel spot. Marcus Ratcliffe, who's a name I've probably heard the most since he entered the transfer portal. 3 years of eligibility remaining, so you might have somebody who has played, who has produced, and has years left. Offered by Florida. We'll see that visit to be determined of when it's going to happen, but should happen after getting the offer from Florida. And then Kendrick Simpkins, safety from Western Kentucky. In 2023, 51 total tackles, 11 tackles for loss at the safety spot, 7.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles. All Conference USA second team in this past season. Had 42 total tackles in 2022, 2 seasons of eligibility. We'll see when he visits as well, but does have an offer from Florida. But we just, like as I said, had to concentrate here, Will, on just a number of defensive back targets in the transfer portal after what we saw and all those explosive plays given up this past year. You were concentrating on those coverage grades. I mean, we see the action Florida is taking in the transfer portal here.
Yeah, I think Ratcliffe obviously is the developmental prospect. PFF rating of 55.2, 63.4 in coverage last year in 651 snaps. So again, you're going to have to see a jump forward from him in order for him to see the field as a starter, given who Florida is going to have coming back. Simpkins is a little bit different, 70.3 overall, 64.4 in coverage, 90.7 for pass rush. So you think about like Florida's safeties in the past, probably more like a Marcus May type of guy who's going to be able to come up and lay the wood, as opposed to a guy who's necessarily going to be strong in coverage. But beggars can't be choosers at this point. Florida safeties the last 3 or 4 years haven't really been all that effective at doing that or being in coverage. If you can get a guy out there who you can bring in and say, we're bringing this guy in the box, and when we need a guy in the box, we're going to bring in a guy like Kendrick Simpkins, and I think that starts to make sense. Obviously, we've gone over Voisin, and then you talk about Douglas, Humphrey, Alexander, Ratcliffe, and Simpkins, all safeties or corners, clearly an area of emphasis for Florida. And it should be, because if you start looking at the elite defenses in college football, none of them are below average at corner and safety. Like none of them are below, like the top 20 Power 5 defenses in the country. If you actually look at their PFF ratings, I don't think any of them are below average at either corner or safety. Some of them are right around average for one of them, but the really top tier defenses have elite at one position or the other. None of them below average. Florida was below average at both positions last year for the guys who all got meaningful snaps. And so I think that's, obviously a place where the team feels like they need to make an adjustment. Now, it is interesting that the guys that they're going after, you've read off South Alabama, Tulane, UTSA, San Diego State, Western Kentucky, and then you start looking at a team like Ole Miss and what they've done. Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, Chris Paul from Arkansas, Mary McDonald from Tennessee, DeCamerion Richardson from Mississippi State, Antoine Wells from South Carolina, Human Meelan from Florida, Key Lawrence from Oklahoma, Tavion Nicholson from Illinois, and Lewis Moore from Indiana. Those guys coming in the transfer portal are all coming from Power 5 schools. And so it's going to be fascinating to see, all right, does the performance that we've seen at a Western Kentucky match sort of like, is average play from Florida, when you think about a guy like Human Meelan, is that more or less valuable than very good play from somebody at, say, a UTSA or Bowling Green or something like that? And that's something, honestly, we don't have a lot of data on, just because the transfer portal has been so sparingly used up until the last year or two. Typically, transfers have been sort of projects, right? Some guy who was a blue chip level prospect couldn't get on the field, and was it just not a fit with the program, or is it that the guy couldn't hack it? That was sort of who you got in the transfer pool. Now it's guys who were starters last year and have decided, I just want to go start someplace else, and that's who's transferring. And so it's going to be fascinating to me to see how this plays out. But clearly, a different strategy for Florida in terms of who they're targeting, given the locations that we've listed off. I mean, UCLA and USC are sort of the only two big time programs that you've mentioned, for all of these different guys. And that's going to be one of the things, Kiffin has clearly decided to prioritize Power 5 experience, and Napier, at least with this list, has not. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think if we go that route and say, let's hit it close to home a little bit, you had Osiris Torrance from Louisiana at Florida. You had, Jared Verse, and he was from Albany? I think he transferred from Albany to Florida State, and is going to be a high pick in the NFL draft. Sticking with FSU, Braden Fisk from Western Michigan, I believe. So, close to home, a rival. We have seen that jump. So, talking about a jump and probably the top target. I know we talked about top targets on the backside, but let's move up front right quick. I saved him for last because it might be the best of the bunch. Cassius Howell, edge from Bowling Green, tied for first in the MAC with 9.5 sacks this past season. 10.5 tackles for loss. According to Pro Football Focus, the college version, 41 pressures, which ranked fourth most pressures in the MAC. He's got 2 seasons of eligibility, supposed to be visiting on January 3rd. I mean, talked about Princely, him going to Ole Miss. You're looking for a replacement there. Florida's got some young pieces that we, a TJ Searcy, a Pyburn. What does, can he bounce back from injury? But this is a guy who has put some numbers together at the level that you're talking about, Will, and would it be able to translate if he was to come to Florida?
Well, I mean, this guy's stats almost make him a dead ringer for Human Meelan when you start looking at the Pro Football Focus. 73.1 overall, 66 for run defense, 90 for pass rush, 43 for coverage. So for the love of God, Austin Armstrong, don't drop him into coverage. We've seen that too much. Please don't do that to us. You look at a guy like Human Meelan, he was 76.3 overall for defense, 69 against the run, 89 pass rush, 52 in coverage. So he really is sort of a dead ringer for Human Meelan in terms of his overall statistical profile from last year. Obviously, the question will be, what kind of growth can you see when you bring a guy in from Bowling Green, and what does that look like? I think, and sometimes just a change of scenery is important. I think I think what we're going to find is Human Mielen's going to play really, really well at Ole Miss, and the change of scenery is going to be good for him. And so the hope is that with a guy like Howell, especially, and this is the thing, is we're talking about these guys and where they're from, but we also can't gloss over the fact that Florida already has Shamir Dike at wide receiver, Joey Slackman coming in from Penn there at defensive end. You got Triquez Bridges coming in from Oregon. So they have hit some guys on the defensive side of the ball, specifically in Slackman and Bridges, who are Power 5 or at least big time recruits, right? Slackman is a guy who everybody wanted. Bridges, a guy from Oregon, so Power 5 experience. And then you start adding some of these guys we've talked about. So you'd have Slackman next to a guy like Howell, next to the guys who are all SEC freshmen like TJ Searcy and those guys. And all of a sudden now you start to look at it and go, if Kelby Collins can step up, if Jamari Lyons can step up, if maybe you get a bump, if Justice Boone comes back, if you get a jump from Cameron Jackson, now the place that I look at and just go hole, there's a giant hole is linebacker. Yeah. And that's where, we talked a little bit earlier about Pup Howard. Shamar James coming back from injury will be important, but I still think there's probably a transfer or two in there that Florida would like to have at the linebacker position, even in addition to Pup Howard if he ends up committing to Florida. I think there's probably even one more spot they'd like to fill there, just because the linebacker position, out of all the places, that was a huge liability for Florida last year. And until they get that fixed, having guys around them who, unless they're just the elite of the elite, having guys around linebackers who are struggling is going to be a hole in your defense. And the way modern offenses are designed to take advantage of spots where you have disadvantages, Florida at least needs to find a way to get these guys, get that position up to replacement level. Otherwise, it's not really going to matter what they do at some of these other spots.
Yeah, and go back to last year. I mean, Taraja Mitchell, RJ Moten, Deuce Spurlock, there's 2 linebackers in there, all guys that didn't contribute or contributed very little with positive impact. I mean, so just hitting the portal doesn't automatically mean you're getting upgrades there.
And Moten was from Michigan.
Yeah.
And Mitchell was from Ohio State, right?
And for Moten, he played a ton. He played a ton of snaps for Michigan.
Well, Mitchell did too at Ohio State until he was injured, right? So I think that this is the thing that I think is going to be fascinating is, just guys who move on from one SEC school to another. In some ways, we make fun of the coaches sometimes and talk about lateral moves and things like that. But isn't it a lateral move to go from Florida to Ole Miss? Yeah. If you're a pass rusher, you're pass rushing against the exact same schedule. There's no, what are you showing to NFL scouts if you do that? So then it's just, hey, I had a disagreement with a coach. I didn't like the way I was being used, that sort of stuff. And I go back to this.
Maybe, I hate to bring it, maybe not winning enough.
Well, and that may be true too. At the same time, at that point, if you're an NFL scout, aren't you sort of looking at it and going, do we want a guy who bails when we're 4-6 and the rubber meets the road and we really need to buckle down to make the playoffs? Or do we need someone who's going to say, well, I'm a free agent at the end of this year, I'm going to go sign with the 49ers or the Ravens or whoever? And again, I'm not accusing any of the Florida guys of that, but I think that's something that I'm interested in understanding, how the Power 5 to Power 5 and especially interconference transfers start to work out. You think about a couple of years ago, Florida gets Daquan Newkirk from Auburn. We were all excited that they'd added him to that space. Antonio Valentino, where did he come from? Wasn't it?
Penn State.
Penn State, guys who were Power 5 transfers. Hey, these guys are going to shore up that interior defensive line. Like Florida has solid guys now at that spot. And, it was complete bull. They were okay, but they were not game changers. And the idea that grabbing someone from a Power 5 school necessarily makes them a better prospect, I think is false. At the same time, I think it gives you a better idea of what they're going to produce, right? The question is going to be, a guy who's got so Cam Alexander with, 81.4 overall for his PFF. If he does that next year, he's Florida's best corner by far. But it's not even close.
Right. And here's the thing, Will, the list that we just went through, and I'm glad you brought it up because this was a route I wanted to go with it. It's not like these guys that are coming in have lost their jobs. We've brought in plenty of transfers that, like RJ Moten, he lost his job at Michigan. Now you probably can say that for Triquez Bridges at Oregon a bit, but changing positions, wants to play more safety, but maybe that's another example that turns out the same way Moten did. But the list we just went through are guys that may be at a lower level, but they didn't lose their job. They went, performed, and now they want to go do it on a bigger stage, and maybe Florida provides that bigger stage.
Well, again, I go compared to what,
Yeah.
right? The question I asked about Jalen Hill, which is where does he sit on a roster that's a championship level defense? You want to apply that to all these guys when you're doing an evaluation is where does this guy sit for a championship level defense? And then where does he sit for our level defense? Right. And then there's a difference between what Florida's put out there the last 3 or 4 years and what they need to put out there now. I mean, there is zero doubt that Florida has to get more instinctual on the defensive side. And honestly, they just need to get more production.
Mhm.
And irrespective of where that comes from, they have to find a way to get more production because there just hasn't been it. There hasn't. I mean, think about the last 2 or 3 years when a guy has made a mistake on the defensive side of the ball. There hadn't been any ability to change him out. There hasn't been any major changes. There hasn't been any of that sort of stuff because there just hasn't been the depth. Like you're putting somebody out there and as a true freshman saying, hey, there you go swim, which isn't necessarily the best way to teach somebody. And if they're going to make the same mistakes that your junior starter was going to make anyway, then okay. But Florida needs to start building that, right? There has to almost in many ways be a mind shift change in terms of and a mindset change within the building. And hopefully bringing in guys who've already had success will be a big part of that. So, if they bring in a guy like DJ Douglas and Cam Alexander, one safety, one corner, those are established guys who expect to come in and start. And so nothing's going to be given to a guy like Bryce Thornton or Jordan Castell or Dijon Johnson or Jakeem Jackson. Those guys are going to have to earn their starting minutes. And I think that's a good environment to fit or to build when the guys coming in expecting to be starters through the portal are guys who have played starters minutes and have performed when they've been out there. Again, it's different performing in the AAC than it is performing in the SEC. And they'll have to establish that on their side. But obviously there's incentive to do so. Because if you're a great corner at UTSA and then all of a sudden you're a great corner at Florida, well, you're all of a sudden going to be a top 3 draft pick. Like there's no doubt to the NFL scouts that you have the ability to play up at that level. So there's a lot of incentive for these guys to come in, play early, play well, and sort of show what they can do at the SEC level. And hopefully it's one of those things where, the rising tide raises all boats and we get the increased accountability and play from the young guys who maybe struggled at times this year, and they're going to have to be more consistent to see the field. And then obviously you've got injury insurance as well if anybody happens to go down.
All right, there we go. A lot of transfer portal talk. just the nature of the business right now. For us covering it and just for college football. I know I see it in the comments. I know a lot of you out there you don't like this side of football, but it's a necessary evil right now, and ways Florida can make this roster a little bit better. So, talk about getting better. Ready for some New Year's resolutions, Will? I think we're looking at this as ways Florida can get better, right?
Hopefully, we'll see what some of your resolutions are. We haven't actually sent each other the list, so I'll be interested to see how much overlap there is. But I told you earlier I had a list of 10, so we'll take top 3 that you haven't already mentioned maybe and go over those.
So I went overall, and then one on offense, one on defense. So overall. They don't have the inexcusable losses. I'm sick of them. Year one, it was Vanderbilt. This past season, it was Arkansas. Of course, while Florida wasn't good in those 2 years either, they were still better than those teams at the end of the day. Still found a way to lose those games. And can even extend that, Will, to win the games you're in position to win. 4th and 17 versus Missouri. Get it done. Up 12-0 on Florida State with all the momentum in the world. Go win that game. So, it's I'm probably going basement level here a little bit with this first New Year's resolution for the Gators, but do those things, and man, that's improvement for at least a couple of wins for the Gators.
Well, that would be nice. I would enjoy winning some games. It's been a while since we've seen that. My first one sort of dovetails with that, which is play meaningful November games.
Oh, okay.
It would be great to have some games in November that are not where it's like, oh, we could spoil Georgia's season. Oh, we could spoil Florida State's season. And then you lose those games and you got to listen to that stupid war chant as you leave the stadium. I would love to see Billy Napier playing some meaningful November games. And to be honest, the schedule came out this year for 2024 and we all looked at it and said, oh God, how are we idiots? But I think if you go 9-3, you make the playoff. with that schedule, you go 9-3, you make the playoff. So for the love of Pete, like, let's play some meaningful November games where we're sitting there at that Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State landscape going, hey, if we can go 3-1 in this stretch, we're going to be in the playoff. That would be a cool place to be with the with the 12-team playoff coming in, and certainly would probably devalue my argument that I hate the 12-team playoff. But the advantage of having this schedule is that if you play well and if you play meaningful November games, the playoff is in play. Do I think Florida's going to make the playoff next year? No, I don't. But if we're making a resolution, let's make that 5-game stretch and all 5 of them mean something the whole way down the stretch, rather than just being a spoiler against some of our enemies.
I mean, yeah, can you imagine LSU or Ole Miss roll into the swamp November 16th, November 23rd, and there's a lot riding on that game. It's been a while, right, as you said, since November, and there's been some meaningful games there in the swamp. Yeah, that would, let's get to November 16th with LSU, and that's a game that we remember from years past. Yeah, I like that. I like that one. All right, offense. I'll keep it kind of basic here. Be more consistent on there, and build on leads. That's probably my biggest one. In early games when Florida's up by a score, they have the ball back and a chance to go up by 2 scores, possibly earlier in the game. I want to see build on some leads. Build a 2-score lead on somebody. Don't let teams hang around. There's so many games this past year where Florida had a chance to go up by a couple of scores and just couldn't do it. So my New Year's resolution for the offense, build on leads, and in a way that lends itself to be more consistent.
Well, I have one that sort of does go with that, which is
Okay.
I want to see 14 points in the last first four. Just once. I'd like to see Florida actually do that to somebody else under Billy Napier. The last 4 minutes of the first half, the first 4 minutes of the second half. Let's get the ball with 2.5, 3 minutes left, go down, score a touchdown, get the opening kickoff of the second half, go down and score a touchdown. Let's make the other team nervous when they punt the ball to Florida with 2.5 minutes left, that, we might be up 3 points, but by the time we get the ball back, we're going to be down 11. Because that's been what's happened to Florida for like 4 straight years now, where, we're going to punt it with 2.5 minutes left to LSU or to Tennessee, and all of a sudden the entire game changes. The one I'm really remembering is the Hendon Hooker game from 2 years ago where Florida was ahead, punt it to Tennessee with 2.5 minutes left, have them like 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11. Brenton Cox comes up the middle, misses the sack. Hooker hits the throw, and all of a sudden, 2 plays later, Tennessee's ahead. Come out, score a touchdown to start the second half, and Florida's playing catch up the entire time. One of the things that's been a real criticism of Napier has been his game management. That is the thing that I think if you can start to take advantage of those sorts of things, if you can condition your team to be able to be situationally aware, then I think that would be a great resolution. Let's put some 14 pointers up in that first 4, last 4, and go from there.
Okay. And everybody, while you're in, I see the comments, whether you're watching live or the replay, leave your New Year's resolutions in the comments. I'm sure a lot of these will be fun right here as we go back and look at them. And on defense, this one's not hard. Just be better. Can we just be better? Can we just be better on defense? But to take it a step further, Will, I'm sure this was probably part of your list of 10 that you had because it was something you were worried about. It showed up on this defense, stopping the explosive plays. Look, this defense actually was better in down-to-down play, but it was wiped away by all the explosives given up on this defense. So at the very least on defense, the New Year's resolution is quit giving up the 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-yard plays.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That's actually not on my list because I'm just penciling in the explosive plays from Armstrong's defense. I would love for them to be able to translate some explosive plays on the defensive side of the ball to offset the explosives they're going to give up in the passing game. That's just sort of what he does. That's what he's done in his entire history now. And, I think that's the reality is that, until proven otherwise, I'm going to assume those are built in. But I did have finished top 50 in defense. So I think that's sort of saying at least improve on that side of the ball, regardless of how it comes. Let's improve. So the third one I'd pick, I have a bunch of different things I could pick from. I had a goofy one, which is hold ETN to negative yardage. That's one of them.
Hey, I like that. I like that.
But the one that I think is actually most important to me, and maybe this is because I'm from an R&D environment, maybe it's because we do this for our professions, at least in the evenings, is define what the future looks like. So whether the future is Billy Napier or not, I want to know by the end of the year. A tweener season where you're sort of sitting there going, like, I don't know, like where you can argue both sides, where it's like, oh, has he had enough time? Like, I would love to have a season where I go, Napier's definitively the guy. These are the reasons why. I can see it. I would also not love, but at least would appreciate being able to say, not the guy. These are the reasons why. Time to cut bait. But a tweener, I don't really know. Like, I'm not sure I can take that, man. I'm just not sure I can take it. Like,
is that just based on record?
It's not based on record. I think it's based on hope. We've talked about this over and over and over again, is that the job of a college football coach until he wins is to deliver hope. And the recruiting class falling apart a couple of weeks ago, heading into early signing day, that to me is probably the worst thing out of everything that's happened over the past year, because the recruiting class was always hope. DJ Lagway is hope. And so, look, if you go 6-6, but Lagway comes out like Peyton Manning did, in his true freshman year for Tennessee, plays in the last 4 games and just lights it up. Well, now you'd be an idiot to get rid of the head coach that Lagway is comfortable with if he's lighting stuff up out there. At the same time, like, you're selling hope, right? If all of a sudden the defense takes a major jump and the offense really struggles until Lagway comes in, again, I think that's sort of the same type of thing. But, if they go with Graham Mertz for 11 games, even when the offense is sort of sputtering, if the defense is still bad again, like all those sorts of things, like, what do you have to sell to the fan base? And that to me is the thing, is this job is a sales job until you start winning. And so, yeah, Dave, I would love to have definitive answers, wins and losses on the field, that this thing is heading in the right direction. Certainly it can't hurt. And we've been talking extensively. One of the things I keep talking about is the number of withdrawals Billy Napier's been taking versus the number of deposits that he's made. And there haven't been a whole lot of deposits recently. So, the 2025 recruiting class, let's see, that thing needs to get going. The 2024 guys hitting on the guys they brought in. Yeah, that needs to happen. Lagway, especially, and McCray, especially, the linebackers, especially, need to start hitting. There's a lot of stuff you could see where you could define it as that, but I just want to know what the future looks like. I don't want to be murky, because I think if you get into murky, then you get into something where you've got the fan base sort of going at each other rather than being unified in terms of what's best for everybody. And I think when you get to a unification point, then everyone is going to circle the wagons. And if that unification point is Billy Napier is the guy, then all of the NIL and all of the booster support and all that stuff falls into line. If the answer is Billy Napier's not the guy, well, then you get a new guy in, and all of that booster support and all of the NIL and all that stuff ends up behind him. The worst thing you can have is,
you talked about hope, and there's a hope that always comes with a new hire.
well, absolutely. But that's why the bump class is so important, Dave. That's why the bump class is so important. So look, I think that's what I want. That would be my resolution, is let's talk about, let's define what the future is going to look like at the end of next year, and know where we are coming into New Year's Eve. And hopefully it's in a playoff game. And, I know people think I'm delusional. At the same time, people would have said that about some of the other programs that have made the playoffs the last few years. It's funny, the Auburn team back in 2010 with Cam Newton at the helm, they were 5-7 and 8-5 the 2 years before Newton came in there and started playing. Quarterback position makes a big difference. They had Nick Fairley and they had Cam Newton, and then it was a lot of the guys who'd gone 5-7 and 8-5, and that was a team that wins the national championship. And I think the landscape has changed, and I think obviously the Alabama and Georgia behemoths weren't necessarily the Alabama one was, but the Georgia behemoth wasn't what it was in the SEC East. It's a harder road to hoe. And we've talked extensively about Napier sort of riding this razor's edge now that, Lagway has to hit. And that's really sort of the way it sits at this point. But there is a path where Florida becomes really, really good, really, really quickly, because they all of a sudden have elite quarterback play. Look, Washington went 8-0 in one-score games this year so far and rode that to a national championship game. Penix is awesome. That team without Michael Penix is what, 9-4? Maybe. Penix is the reason that they're playing in the national championship game. They are not as talented as Michigan. They're not as talented as Texas, and they're not as talented as Alabama. But Michael Penix is one of the best players in the country.
Yeah,
If
when you
not,
make those throws he was making,
Whew.
I mean, I'm telling you, I was in awe. I mean, look, I've watched him a few times this year, but to see it at that stage.
Well, the one specifically where they moved him off his spot in the pocket, he slid to the right and then just fired a bullet at the guy coming across the middle. Like there, you're sitting there going, you can't teach that. And even if you can, this guy is really special in terms of what he can do. So, hey, maybe I'm delusional, but the reality is that if Florida goes 9-3, they make the playoff. And that, I think, would give us clear definition of what the future looks like. Certainly would give us hope for the program. And there are many things Napier can do to put deposits into that bank account of goodwill for Gator Nation. But out of all of them, winning games is the easiest way to put money in that account. You go 9-3, you're going to end up in the black, man. I mean, literally, I don't think there's any way a 9-3 SEC team is out of a 12-team playoff with the schedule Florida has. Because it just means you've beaten quality teams along the way. I mean, maybe the only way is if you lose like Florida State lost to Georgia the other day in one of them, then maybe that ends up keeping you out. But I think a 9-3 team makes the playoff. Again, 9-3, really, really, really friggin' tough. But win some games and it takes care of itself.
All right, there we go. Those are New Year's resolutions right there for the Gators. Hey, since we just talked about it, college football playoff final now set, Washington, Michigan. We will talk a little bit of big picture college football here because, hey, look, it's end of the year, national championship game. I thought Washington and Texas I went back and forth on. I think I ultimately did lean Washington. I was going Bama in the other matchup. That did not work out there. But, for all the drama following Michigan all year long, they keep finding a way to win. They really have rallied around that them against the world mentality there. Finally got their first playoff win after getting just spanked the last couple of years in the playoff. Now on their way to face Washington, Penix, who we just talked about. And I think it's a good matchup, good contrast of styles. I think I would be afraid if Michigan just dominates up front and limits Penix. I think that would probably be the pathway to a Michigan victory. But also, if Penix is given time, can Michigan cover those receivers? So really good contrast of styles here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, look, I think Michigan has been one of those teams that's been knocking on the door the whole way. Washington has made the playoff once, I think, before this when they had Jake Browning at quarterback. So obviously there's a pattern here, right? that when you have a quarterback who's NFL quality, and Browning is winning games in the NFL now for the Bengals, not at Joe Burrow level, but he's a solid backup quarterback there in the NFL.
And
when you got guys,
yeah.
Sure. But Penix was also the quarterback last year for Washington, right? So there's a pattern in terms of college football and what you can do and how you can win. McNamara is McCarthy is a 5-star quarterback that Jim Harbaugh brought in. And actually Cade McNamara was the quarterback 2 years ago in the playoffs, got superseded by McCarthy there at the quarterback position. And so look, it's not as and was, I think, 10th in the Heisman voting. So you got a guy who was quarterback 10th in the Heisman voting, a guy who was 2nd in the Heisman voting. And after the game the other night, I think everybody wants Jaden Daniels to give his trophy back over to Michael Penix. But it's funny because I saw Penix. My dad and sister went to Indiana, and so I sort of root for the Hoosiers a little bit. I grew up in the state, and at least till I was 16. And so he's like all of a sudden Indiana was winning like 8 games back in that 2020 season. And you're like, wait a minute, Indiana is in the top 25. Like this happens like once a century. Like what's going to happen? Some like, is hell going to freeze over? What's going on here? Indiana's good at football. And sure enough, he goes off to Washington and all of a sudden is lighting things up. So to me, that's the thing this is a quarterback battle. Penix seems to do okay, even when he's pressured, as opposed to Milroe, who clearly Michigan was able to confuse. They confused the Alabama offensive line. And after that first quarter where Milroe just got absolutely was getting absolutely just destroyed by the pass rush from Michigan. They just really didn't throw the ball that much. All the deep shots that Alabama's taken all year with Milroe were relatively infrequent. They didn't do that same sort of stuff. Still, I think Michigan pretty lucky to win that game, down by a touchdown there with 3 minutes left, go for it on 4th down. They convert that for a big play. All of a sudden, they had the ball that was tipped that was then caught and taken inside the 5-yard line. If that ball's tipped a little bit higher, maybe you get a pick for Alabama. Certainly the fact that Alabama couldn't snap the ball was a contributing factor to all this stuff too. And at the end of the day, if they'd had a good snap to Milroe and if he'd been able to cut left on that last play, that game might still be going on. But heck of a couple of games, man. I mean, if we have a championship game like we saw for the 2 games we saw yesterday, it'll be an awesome time for college football, which is great because most of the other bowl games have been pretty non-competitive. The Oregon Liberty game was just completely non-competitive. The Tennessee Iowa game, completely non-competitive. The Georgia Florida State game, completely non-competitive. That's not good for college football, right? It's one of those things. I was telling somebody today, they were asking me what I thought about the Georgia FSU game. And I was like, it's kind of like Jackass the movie, where like everybody goes to see the first one, but there's a very select number of people who go see Jackass 6. And so, like, to me, okay, it's a train wreck. Florida State getting left out, undefeated Power 5. I thought they should have been in, but whatever. I'm okay with them being left out. Get absolutely just bulldozed by Georgia. Half their team isn't there, all that sort of stuff. And afterwards, you got Kirby Smart feeling sorry for him afterwards, like basically sitting up there at the podium going, this should never happen. That's a good football team. I assure you, I know we beat them by 60 and we even called off the dogs there in the 4th quarter, but that shouldn't happen. College football needs to fix it. But now you look at the ratings. The ratings came out today and everybody watched it. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that the incentive structure for college football is not to go, well, everybody watched it. That must be what people want. It's like, nah, this was the first Jackass movie. And as we move forward into Jackass number 6, like nobody's going to want to watch that anymore. And so to me, that's sort of the analogy. And hopefully that stuff does get fixed because, I'm warming to the 12-team playoff given what's happened to all the opt-outs. Like you and I think you were the one who proposed it first, having the bowl games played as like the first game, week 0 of the season next year, and doing it that way so that they at least mean something. And that's kind of a cool concept. But if they're not going to do that, then, we've sort of gotten to a point where it's playoff or bust for everybody. And, that's kind of what you could feel, right? Like to me, the week of Christmas was very much just sort of, there's something on, I'll turn it on. But I didn't watch a ton of college football, which is a problem for college football, considering that I'm a diehard and I'm sitting there going, I know I can't glean anything from looking at Iowa play Tennessee, except for maybe that Tennessee's 5-star quarterback may be a problem next year. But, there just wasn't a whole lot to glean. So how much are you going to watch?
Yep. All right. Before we go, update on Jaden Voisin. As you said, the visit's not going to happen. I said reasons. Mention grades, mention credits. It does sound like it might be a medical deal there for Voisin and why he's not visiting Florida. So that's happened before. We've heard about that. Maybe keeping other guys from visiting or coming to Florida there. Though it does sound like so maybe something else can get figured out. Maybe it's just the visit's not happening now or right now. Maybe it happened down the road. But as of now, Jaden Voisin not visiting does sound like it may be part of a medical deal. So there we go. A little update before we sign off here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. All right, well, there we go. First episode of 2024 in the books. Ready to get it all and now we just got to wait for the season again.
Well, I'm just, I told you one of my New Year's resolutions was that you didn't get memed by Matt Hayes next year. So at least, or if you do, it's for positive things, not when early signing day's falling apart. So,
hey, well, that was after the FSU game. Got a little emotional. Hey, look, a lot of work goes into August, September, October, December, and that was one reason I took a whole week off last week, spend it with the family and stuff. And but here we are, ready to attack it again with the new year.
Yeah. Well, let me plug your stuff, man. I mean, I think, you talk about Gators Breakdown Plus. The Discord's really cool to go talk to people who are committed to the program and some of the other stuff there on Gators Breakdown Plus. But if for no other reason, because of the amount of work that goes into putting this sort of stuff together, I obviously am a little bit behind the scenes, contribute something to it. But you're the guy doing the yeoman's work when it comes to putting that stuff together. And I felt that when you got emotional about it after the Florida State, not just because of where the program is and that sort of stuff, but because of the amount of effort, the amount of time, and the amount of relationships that you build around the football program. And so, like, we all want to see Florida succeed.
Yeah.
And so we're critical when we feel like we need to be critical because there's a need to do that. But and because that's how you get better, right? Is by actually looking at stuff and saying, hey, this needs to improve, or this is what we need to do. So look, those relationships are the things that make this worthwhile, but anything worthwhile is hard. And anybody who's watching this here, just know this is the hardest working guy in the business I'm talking to right now. And, it's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and hopefully everybody appreciates everything you put into it.
No, thanks, Will. Thanks for those kind words. And hey, here's a happy new year. Here's the 2024, and hopefully bigger things on the horizon for us. Gators Breakdown, reading reaction, the Gators out there as well. And hey, we'll have some fun this year covering it all for you again. So everybody out there, happy new year from Gators Breakdown. That'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown.